Hi, everyone. Let's see. I think we're just waiting for one more of our speakers to get here. But while we do that, I'm just gonna say thank you to some people. We're waiting for folks to trickle in. Um, So I want to start by saying thank you to everybody here for being with us in the middle of your Saturday and for making time to surround yourself with art and reading and connection with American Muslim writers on your September 11th. I also want to thank Consequence Forum, who also helped us get the word out about this event. They do critical work of creating entry points to conversations like this, addressing the human consequences of and realities of conflict and war and geopolitical violence through literature, art, and community events. And part of what we're celebrating today is the New Moon's anthology of contemporary writing by North American Muslims from Hen Press, and our editor and poet extraordinaire Kazim Ali, which comes out on November 16th. So I want to express thanks to each of the illustrious authors joining us here who really pulled this event together on a tight time frame, because each of them had their own reasons. They felt it was necessary to see a narrative today centering own voices, poetry, memoir, and speculative fiction from a group that defines Muslim broadly and inclusively. And finally, we have a big thank you to Twente District for handling pre-sales and helping us promote the book and get the word out about this event, and also for generally facilitating important conversations centering Black and Brown experiences for everybody. So I'm going to introduce Angela Spring, who's the owner of Twente District, to tell you a little bit more about what they do before we get started with the rest of the event.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting us to be a part of this. As you said, this is absolutely something that we do. These conversations are everything. I'm Angela Maria Spring, the owner of Twente District. We are a collaborative pop-up bookstore by and for people of color, where all are welcome, with current locations in Washington, D.C. The D.C. location is at Shopkeepers in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and our New Mexico location is at Red Planet, which is the only Indigenous-owned comic book store in the world. So the cornerstone of the Duende Project is about the collective, the community, and creation and decolonization of literary spaces by and for people of color. And I'm just delighted that this anthology exists, and delighted that this conversation is happening, because as I deeply believe, and I believe our community believes, the conversation, especially on this day, surrounding this topic, it is yours, it is the Muslim communities, the narrative should always be yours. So I just want to say thank you again. We're delighted to be a part of this, and really looking forward to hearing everybody.
Thanks, Angela. So I think I'm gonna just tell you a little bit about, I guess, part of my own personal motivation for organizing this. A year ago, I was working for a 10-person team in the Department of Treasury in DC that was responsible for raising $4 trillion of funds to support the CARES Act that was passed by Congress. I was working 18-hour days at times and writing where I could before I went to bed. And every year, or many years, including last year, we received an email on September 11th describing how on this day in 2001, Americans were fearful of what could come next and woke up on September 12th, united as one nation, ready to stand against any evil that tried to take us down. How, as patriots, we channeled our feelings of anger and pain into togetherness and strength. And that in that moment, we no longer thought of what divided us, that September 12th, 2001 reflected the best of America. And while I wish that I could have felt that that was true, and while there's parts of that story that ring to the fear, the humanity, the kindness that existed and that persists, of course, I mourn, we mourn, all of those impacted by the attacks. I felt erased by that letter each year because I remember September 11th as the day that fueled so much of the Islamophobia that I had to contend with. And so much of the work that I told myself I had to do to put friends and employers at ease with me, that I think a lot of people in this community also have felt. And the hardest part of it for me is that while I wrestled with writing a thoughtful email response, explaining why all that all staff remembrance email wasn't inclusive of the experience of all Americans, whether they were practicing Muslims or not, whether they were Sikh or just looked Middle Eastern, whether they were maybe Christian Arabs, or even Arabs and Muslims who could pass as non-Middle Eastern, who held it inside, as a lot of people would privately come tell me because they were scared. The hardest part of that was that the hardest part of it is that I didn't feel like this was an email that I could write or share. And I think that left me with a deep concern for how we, and the reason it left me with a deep concern for how we govern ourselves. When a headscarf wearing American Muslim woman who works in the government can't raise the blind spots that she sees around her. And it was basically because I felt that I would put my management chain at risk if I said something. So that's my story. It's one piece of why I was motivated to bring all of us together today. But also the other part of it is that there's so many different stories that are quite different from mine that are represented here and in the New Moons anthology that I feel like need to be shared. And so I want to say that organizing this event has been a real lesson in, as I've said to some of the authors, in the harmony and cacophony of hats that we each wear or that we're assigned to wear at various times with regards to what it means exactly to be represented as Muslim or to represent ourselves as Muslim or be identified as Muslim by others. And also with regards to how much energy we give to challenging the predominant narratives of 9/11 and Muslims in the West versus creating a space for imagining and building our own brighter futures, whatever that looks like. And I think you'll hear some of all of those things today. I think it's perhaps in part because of these tensions that maybe it's taken so long for an anthology that brings together such multitudes to exist. And this is why art is important. It helps us connect across these barriers that we've run up against or that we've built. And if this event can't be a representation of all American Muslim writing, which it obviously can't be in all of its diversity, or even in the breadth of writing that's in the New Moons anthology, I hope you'll treat it as an entry point to discover voices that are new to you or to engage with voices that you recognize in new ways and contexts. So this is why I'm really excited to introduce poet, author, and our editor, Kazim Ali, next to talk about what North American Muslim writing is and how and why this anthology came together.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for being here. And thanks to the contributors also to this book that is soon to be, this is an advanced copy. This is not the actual copy. So I think that the actual copy will be available soon, but we're all really, of course, really excited about it. Listen, to even have had a gathering of writers like this, Muslim writers, granted by Zoom, it was science fiction at the time, but even in the days after 2001, we could barely do it. There were so few people who were out there working and publishing and being published. And that's the important part, the being published part. The number of American Muslim writers who actually had platforms was very small. Agha Shahid Ali had just died, and Abdul Hai Moore was there, an American convert. Daniel Moore, who was a beat poet who then became Sufi. Other than that, there were not many, widely known, widely published people. Moja remembers. We were both younger people at the time, trying to come up, trying to look for role models, trying to find mentor figures. in writing and poetry and publishing. And that really wasn't there as much anymore. Of course, we all know that there has been American Muslim writing since the beginning of America, because there were Muslims here at the beginning of America, right? Most of the indentured labor that was brought, enslaved labor that was brought to this country, those people were Muslims. That's the historical. But did they have access? You know, was their work known? Is there a lineage? Is that canon there? We don't have their work, in other words. And so, you know, this anthology, even however many years later, 20 years after, we've slowly been building this community of Muslim writers. Tariq was there. When was it, my friend? 5 or 6 years ago, maybe, when we just decided to spontaneously gather every Muslim person we could find in a hotel room at AWP. I mean, we were literally going up to people in the hallways, in the bathroom, anywhere we could get them, to tell them like, oh, when's, you know, Thursday night at 10 o'clock in this hotel room, we're all going to be there, you know. And then we got into that room and we all just kind of wept for a little while. We did other things too. We did talk. But there was weeping because we just couldn't believe, because each of us had come from some small place or big place and had not been in a room full of other writers like that. So that was important to, you know, this, you know, that sense of community we didn't have, and we now have it, and we're building it. And hopefully, you know, this anthology will help to build this even more. And there are various organizations that exist, of course, that you all are more knowledgeable about than I am, that we're really involved in. But I mean, I want to shout out, before I read, I'm going to read very briefly from the very beginning of the introduction of the anthology, just as a way of introducing everything. But before I do that, I really do want to shout out my sister, Moja Kaf, because as I said in the beginning, when we were back in those days, we were coming up, we were literally bashing down walls. We were not able to have a lot of finesse, you know. We just had to knock things down. We had to, you know, vault over the fences and the barriers that were put in our way. And you, Moja, I mean, you were creating scholarship, path-breaking scholarship, your books of poetry, your novel, Girl in the Tangerine Scarf, that was probably one of the earliest. I mean, there were a spate of novels about 9/11, after 9/11, but they were all by white writers. And Moja's was one of the earliest that was actually by a Muslim writer about 9/11, and that was in 2006. So you know what I mean? So we didn't have a receptive audience either, you know, and you are a pioneer in many ways. And I'm just so grateful to have been on this journey with you, and so happy to see you here today. So I just want to honor you before I even begin. Moja Kaf. And yes, if you haven't read her books, even you have a homework assignment is given to you. So I'll just read very briefly from the opening of the introduction to give you some sense of the ethic behind this anthology. At the outset, I want to suggest that the project of this anthology may run counter to the most common purposes of such an anthology, which would normally be to suggest a trajectory or arc or range of common interest of Muslim writers, but it's hard to say what a Muslim is. There are, of course, a multiplicity of Islams, a range of perspectives and schools of thought about the way to practice, what the religion means, and how to access the divine. This plurality is historical. Nearly immediately upon its founding, there were already multiple streams of Islams, at least 3, lineages that continued to diverge. As Islam spread within 2 centuries following the Prophet's death across the Maghreb to the western coast of Africa, and then into Spain and France, and all the way to China in the east, and on into South Asia and Oceania. There are Pacific Muslims, ancient populations of Pacific Islander Muslims, and eventually to the Americas via the slave trade. Islam continued to develop, change, and grow, and to influence and be influenced by the cultures it encountered. Islam, as it's practiced in the Middle East, bears only some similarities to the culturally distinct South Asian Islam, and so on. My point is that this plurality is neither modern, postmodern, or contemporary. This plurality has been part and parcel of Islam since nearly the moment of its founding. Muslim writing in North America is older than anyone supposes. Most, if not all, of the first West Africans who lived here brought as enslaved labor were practicing Muslims and had been for hundreds of years before their capture. The Islam they practiced was generational, sophisticated, and infused with a deeply African spiritual and philosophical framework. To my mind, the theology of liberation that drove Southern Black Christianity as it was practiced among enslaved African populations from their arrival through and after the Civil Rights Movement and to the present day has its roots in the deeply foundational liberation theology of original Islam. In fact, Islam at its heart and its foundation, its fundament, I would dare to say, is cosmopolitan, multicultural, multilingual, friendly to alternative family and community structures, and radical in its approach to questions of religious and political authority. So radical, in fact, that within years of the passing of the Prophet and the original generation of teachers, what Muslims call his companions, the ruling classes of the era had fully co-opted the teachings of Islam, eliminated the democratic oral transmissions of scripture by canonizing a written version of the Quran and destroying all variants, and marginalized or murdered most of the teachers who taught alternative doctrines to that which was approved by the political elite ruling from first Damascus, then later Baghdad, and later still Cairo. It was not until the ascendance hundreds of years later of the more socially liberal Western Caliphate in Al-Andalus that Islam began to once more resemble the Islam of its earliest days. Okay, I go on and on in the introduction, but I'm just going to close with this little blurb about the anthology. What I mean to say is that what makes an anthology like this interesting are precisely the reasons it would seem on the surface to be irrelevant. Each of the writers contained in this anthology brings their own relationship to Islam, with Islam, to the page. It is not always apparent from writer to writer how they are positioning themselves within the context of Islam, and this collection includes the religious of all stripes, practicing and non-practicing, the cultural Muslim, the secular Muslim, the feminist Muslim, Muslims of various gender identities, sexualities, and national origins. The writers within are converts, reverts, good Muslims, bad Muslims, born Muslims, ex-Muslims, trying to be good or failing to be Muslim, and I choose to refute any ghost of a trajectory. In this sense, the architecture that is created by the alphabetical order is a chance divination. My goal with this anthology was to represent that full range of contemporary expressions of Islam, as well as a full range of genres. The Muslim community is plural and contradictory, and this collection of voices ought to be symphony and cacophony at once, like the body of Muslims as they are today. Thank you for listening to my rant and rave, and which says better than I ever could about what this anthology is and why we created it the way we created it. I'm so grateful to IA for organizing this event, and to all of the contributors who are throughout the next months. I think there are going to be countless events organized with the various, there's like, I don't even know how many people are in this anthology, but there's going to be lots of different small events featuring all different kinds of people. So please, if you're tuning in today, 65, I should know the answer to that question, right? Hey, maybe I found a co-editor for the next edition. If you're tuning in today, I hope you will go to Red Hen Press's website, and there's going to be a calendar up there posted of all of the different events that are happening around this anthology. I don't even know what they all are. It's just this wonderful profusion of readings. So we're going to move over to my kid brother, my dear friend, who I have a lot of love for. He's going to open our reading. I'm going to give you a little intro from him. Does the intro from the anthology. Tariq Lutun is a data consultant, community organizer, and poet from Detroit, Michigan, the son of Palestinian immigrants. He earned his MFA in poetry from Warren Wilson College, and he's currently serves as the editor of the micro department at the Offing, and his writing has earned him an Emmy Award. Brother, I need to hear about that. An Emmy Award and the honor of Best of the Net, and his work has appeared in Vinyl, Poetry, Lit Hub, Mizna, great publication, Winter Tangerine Review, and Button Poetry, and other places too. And there's a book published too, but it was after this anthology, so that didn't go into the bio. But so we're going to hear from you. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for having me. Assalamu alaikum. That's the first time I've ever actually said salam on an event, on a webinar. But yeah, I'll start it with a poem and then I'll say some stuff. So can y'all hear me? We're good? Cool. Ode to brown child on an airplane for the first time. I don't remember if I too was afraid, but I do remember when the sky was our thing. I could say the word flight, and in its stead, none would hear the word fight spill from my jaw. The last time it took a punch, I was in the boys' bathroom surrounded by boys as the boy unleashed his fist into me. I returned the favor into his gut and ran. Moments before, he had called me gay, but I wasn't sure why I had to defend my glee. Scarce as it was, hours later, a mess of tears ran through me as I was pulled from gym by the principal and suspended for defending what little parts of myself I could still call mine. I don't know why this is the story I choose to tell, but I do know that I may forget it once we take off, shedding the skin that everyone fears of releasing towards the sun. Beautiful, isn't it? To be able to leave behind this world, its lost and angry boys. Thank you. So one of the things I've been telling folks, and I was talking to our local radio station about this yesterday, I think a lot of people look at 9/11 as this historical marker, and it is. But I don't really see it as a historical marker in terms of violence against the US, Turtle Island. I see it more as a historical marker in the continued aggression of US imperialism across the world. And realistically, events like 9/11 don't happen if, the CIA doesn't engage with the Taliban many years earlier. And what does it mean to think of 9/11 as really a marker leveraged by the US and by media as an excuse to unleash the animosity that was already building within the West? And so I think in a lot of ways, I always try to make sure we reframe that conversation, even though, we find ourselves 20 years later on Zoom, which is also engaged in surveillance. So I find it ironic as Muslims to be on a Zoom call that is clearly being recorded and then maybe leveraged in some capacity. But to that, I would hope that our art continues to be groundbreaking, continues to do work that I don't think it's been doing in America, but hopefully begins to do, especially as it has been doing globally. I remember my advisor and mentor, Sia Del Young, used to tell me that one of the big issues in America is that we have devalued our poets and our artists in ways that other countries haven't. And I hope that we can get to that place at some point. But then again, you see events like Usher's going to host an activist game show or talk show, so maybe not. But here's another poem. The summer my cousin went missing. I should have asked how her khato was holding up, but I knew where she would be. Her body weary and unkind, buried in the day's tasks, back turned to the home she grew up in. Seeds in the farm soil sprout like miracles sprouting as she tends to them. Is this not always the case? Child upon child goes, and someone's mother is no longer a mother. My aunt, a mother herself, looks for a moment away. Nothing she plants has roots long enough to hold. She turns back anyway, looks ahead. If we are too caught up in the end, like boys fleeing from the day's news, eyes worried about that which we cannot control, however will we stay fed? However will we live long enough to grieve? And I will just close it out with this one. Actually, it's kind of sad. I lost which poem I was going to read. I'm so sorry, y'all. I'm so sorry. But let's do this. Fruit. As kin rise to prey in the deepest shade before each dawn, I ask, what is it about a seed shedding itself into a seed reborn that makes it its name? Still, I wait, as though there is no time for question through the tired feast we become in this moonlight before the fast. Mama speaks, kol, kol, yalla, khod, khod. Eat, go on, take, and I take after my father, who used to pull crab apples right off the trees, lining this morbid crackle of roads that will never belong to us. As my mother runs, her fingertips into dates beneath the rinse, my father would watch the news and say, Americans are too busy watching good fruit wither away, too busy wrapping their teeth around the skin of other things in the evening hours. And meanwhile, we just gnaw through that. He and I take all of our time. It is the only thing our women ask of us. And again, I ask, what makes a brown boy his name? When does he become a feast of yes? A game of eat, take, a riddle? What color of boy doesn't eat what his mother makes him? What being could leap out of a seed and walk upright just long enough to inhale the dirt that will see him a man? Here, we get tired of this script. A muddled film of hardened juice and thickened erasure, the shedding of flesh into soil. Oh, how much easier can we be to take? Another generation passes into the wake, and mama prays in the moonlight before the fast. This is where I come to learn why a mother gives her kin a name that lingers, a name that only we can pronounce. Thank you all.
Thank you, Tara. That was so beautiful. I love hearing you read. So I'm gonna actually read something. I have a funny piece, I think, to everyone, whether it's funny or not, in the anthology. But I'm gonna read something that seems a little bit relevant to today. But this is a piece that's actually called 1993, and that's when it took place. And it's from a memoir and stories that I'm working on, and I write about myself in the third person because it's basically my way of taking claim of the stories that other people have told about me. I watched two boys cross the playground hardtop from the far corner where the younger kids she didn't know usually played. They seemed to look straight at her as they walked, but they were probably headed to the checkout stand where you could borrow a ball during recess, or to the boys' bathroom. There was no reason to single her out, not when she was sitting in the shade of a magnolia tree in a circle of 5 other 6th grade girls from Mrs. Nielsen's class. It's because it's basically 3 outfits in one, Emily Thompson said, looking like the most grown-up of the bunch, in a gray pinstripe suit, her blonde hair sporting a short bob. You can wear just the jacket or the skirt, or you can wear them together. As the wind rustled through her headscarf, Aya thought about what she might add to the conversation. She had seen the same suit at close time with her mom over the weekend, but it hadn't interested her. The denim overalls that were suddenly everywhere felt more in her style, worn with the form-fitting ribbed cotton turtlenecks and black cord necklaces that she had seen. They were more sophisticated than those overalls Linda Book sang children's songs about back in 3rd grade. Aya's mom said she'd think about buying them, but Aya knew she'd have to wait for a sale off the $25 price. So smart, said Sandy Chu. I would never have thought about buying a suit. Behind Emily's shoulder, Aya could see the 2 boys drawing nearer, showing no interest at all in the bin full of balls behind the girls. I bought it with my own money. It's a good investment. For $100, suits normally cost at least twice that much. I like the overalls at close time, Aya said, turning her head back to face the group. Yeah, overalls are definitely cool now, Sandy said, her raven black hair falling against the shoulders of her long-sleeved white tee with a neon cat painting down to her jean skirt. I would wear those. As the boys walked closer, Aya thought about how nice it was to have a group to sit with at recess, after 2 years of spending lunch mostly by herself. The boys were probably 3rd graders. One of them had brown hair and wore a blue t-shirt. The other had soft blonde hair and wore a white tee. Both wore jeans. Aya turned back to face Sandy. Maybe they were walking to the library near the 6th grade classroom. Maybe they were bored. The footsteps behind her became audible, then slowed to a stop. The girl's eyes shifted from Sandy or somewhere above Aya's head to somewhere above Aya's head. Aya could see the red He-Man on the black tennis shoes one of the boys was wearing as she turned her head to face him. He stared down at her. "We have a question," the boy said quietly as his blonde friend stood next to him. "Are you a terrorist?" The eyes all shifted to Aya. She guessed the boys had seen her headscarf across the playground, and maybe somehow they could tell her family was Muslim like the terrorists pretended to be. The answer to their question was no, obviously. Terrorists were horrible people. They hurt people and caused terror on purpose. This is what made them terrorists. I hadn't even heard the word terrorist before the bombing. So obviously she couldn't be a terrorist. But then why had the boys come all this way? The television news had talked about them a lot lately, ever since 2 of them attacked the World Trade Center, killing regular people who were just going about their day. They talked about Islamic terrorists too. I asked her mom why. "God doesn't like anyone who kills innocent people," her mom had answered. "Anyone who does something bad like this isn't a real Muslim. They're hurting Muslims." It was true. Everything Aya knew about Islam was about being a good person, being kind, and helping others. Islam said it was bad to make fun of other kids or hurt their feelings for being too much of a goody-goody, for having feelings that are hurt too easily, for trying too hard to fit in. Islam said those things, let alone blowing up people, were bad. So obviously, Aya was not a terrorist. The 2 boys stood there, still waiting. The girls quietly watched Aya. "No," Aya said. "But if I were," she added quietly, "I probably wouldn't tell you." She wanted to say that it was really true that she wasn't a terrorist. She wanted to insist they should believe her, but something told her it wouldn't help to try so hard. "Oh," the boy rocked his head. "I guess I didn't think about that." He looked at his friend, who looked back at him. They turned around and walked away silently. I think next we have Shadab Tashmi, and I'm gonna put her bio into the chat so we have more time to listen to her speak.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm so happy to be with you. Thank you to Aya and to Kazim and to all of you who are here. I'm going to start by reading a poem from Baker of Tarifa, which is a work that I actually began way before 9/11. I started thinking about Al-Andalus and the whole civilization of Al-Andalus when I was in college. And I came across a very famous Sufi poem, but in Urdu by Allama Iqbal, and visited Spain, and I started reading about this history and so on. And it took me 15 years to write and publish Baker of Tarifa. So the book obviously talks about the 800-year history of Muslims in the West and how they not only influenced Western civilization, but actually shaped it. And so this was actually in response to this narrative of this clash of civilization that was gaining currency at the time. And the point in time when I was writing about the Inquisition is when I see the post 9/11 American culture really reflected in this work. So I'm going to read a poem that is from the section of this book which is actually about the convivencia, and it's mostly about the peaceful coexistence of the Abrahamic people in Spain. And this poem is called "The Stone Mason's Son Contemplates Death." Because my heart became a kiln, I wished to die. The inscription on the tiles made a prayer in butterfly script, crowning your well. May the water refresh your soul. The clanging of keys became loud. A soldier stood behind me, pissing in the well. Someone sang in the distance, couldn't tell if she was a Jew, Christian, or Muslim. It was a devotional song. And I'm going to read a ghazal, which is in the anthology, in the New Moons anthology. And this ghazal, the subject of this ghazal, it's an unusual ghazal because it does have a theme and it does have a subject. This ghazal is called Ghazal for the Girl in the Photo. And it's the famous photo of the Afghan girl. It's taken by Steve McCurry. And I'm going to read it in the Urdu style, the traditional style of ghazal reading. You became the girl with the piercing eyes when you found your country swiped by a stranger. You became the girl with the piercing eyes when you found your country swiped by a stranger. In Kabul's snow, a missile turned your mother into coal. Your last tears were wiped by a stranger. A garden once hung from your name like the perfume of wild apple blossoms, phantom tulips. A garden once hung from your name like the perfume of wild apple blossoms, phantom tulips. In the refugee camp, are you Sharbat Gula, liquor of flowers, or a number typed by a stranger? Your eyes teach how cold flint ignites a flare, how a father's bones become an orphan's roof. Your eyes teach how cold flint ignites a flare, how a father's bones become an orphan's roof. History writes itself clear as cornea, your green glare. No whitewashing, no hype is stranger. Pity the empire that failed to decipher the disdain in your eyes, the hard stare of war. Pity the empire that failed to decipher the disdain in your eyes, the hard stare of war. Pity the first world's pity, the promise of friends who show up as every type of stranger. And this last verse that has my name in it, Ma Takhallus. Zeist returned to the arms of memory, the riddle of its minefields, velvet lullabies. Zeist returned to the arms of memory, the riddle of its minefields, velvet lullabies, to the lilt of this land, its lyrical storms, its bells and bagpipes, you're no stranger. And I'm going to end with a poem from Colin Chalk. Thank you, Moja. And Colin Chalk, some of my work has to do with building on the tradition, the aesthetic tradition of the Islamic cultures. And the rest is, in response to the post 9/11 world, in response to the wars and the displacement and the conflicts. And also my childhood war, everything that happened since 2001 triggered memories of the Soviet war, through which I grew up in Pakistan across from the Afghani border. So I'm going to end with this poem called Notes for My Husband. I showed Yusuf to the amethyst morning when he was born. Kettle drums play 4 at a time, each tuned to play its own note. Each he would swallow whole with my vertical voice in Urdu, and watch with his cardamom eyes the slow flare of Van Gogh's sunflowers, the silk ascent to Victoria's Peak, the concave shine of mango achar. He is slender like pine nuts and keen on butter. Yasin prefers honey and tells me the sun on the front door smells like library soap. I feel the light lathering the knob as I open it. The house is filled with jazz and bagpipes, Iqbal's poems on marble construction paper. We weep in both languages, and anything round is a planet. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
think Farah is next, and I'm gonna put her bio also in the chat so we have more time to hear from her. Mojo, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. It was so great to hear you read that.
Yeah, that was really beautiful. I'm Farah. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. So I'm going to be reading two poems. The first one is called How to Talk White. So I went to a pretty diverse high school in Windsor, Ontario, and I had a lot of classmates who had a lot of internalized racism. And these people didn't really think we should have a diverse curriculum. They made fun of brown accents, and it appeared that they were sort of embarrassed to be themselves. And so I wrote this 4 to 5 years ago. How to Talk White. How my head was blown blank and immobile. How my white friend turned to me twice, her mouth filled with glee and glass and noise splintering into my face. How a brown boy's mouth dropped stolen sonnets of rolled R's and tough T's. How they belonged to his parents, his grandparents, my grandparents. Their clouded reflections crashing like teeth, breaking on contact like rain in a public winter. How his grin stretched irreparably, mocking for the white woman in front of the room. How he bowed, famished for applause, like a dog, like a matador in the ring. The room a coliseum. How loved a sport, a game. Fanatics displaying their colors, the colors they loved on their thick skins. How a series of spears were drawn like breath, burrowing into the bull's skin. The skin thought to be thick, how it charged into a white open mouth, a sheet to cover a determined animal, a person with when it died. How humiliated, naked. It's funny, they aren't talking white. I mean right. And so my next poem is an end of the world poem, an apocalypse poem that I wrote about the same time. I've been writing more of these poems recently, although they're mostly about climate change. And they're sort of about how to live or adjust to living in proximity to danger, or what feels like close proximity. And so End of the World Poems was actually a tentative title for my chapbook. My manuscript's actually in progress, but it's called End of the World Poem. I love the fearsome crocodile as much as you love the fearsome sun. We both know your darling may very well be plotting our demise with its own in a couple million years. And all of us face missiles, shy as white bands, and when noticed, we wave like supermodels before paparazzi. So until it kills us, I will love the failed rocket of the crocodile propelling itself entirely out of water using only its tail. See how it falls and breaks water and the water laughs. Mouth mother-like at this surprising birth and takes further suggestions from the earth carrying us in its flesh. You must love and love and love until us dead things fall and ferment and decompose and grow grass as part of our new aesthetic. Goneness is charged guilty for interrupting goodness, but really this is only evolution. Goodness eats us up, and in our abstractions we lay by the riverbed, watching the crocodile drift closer and ask for its opinion. In its belly, the phoenix recites poems of the crocodile's beauty, whilst teaching us to stir ashes. All of us here in this moment die at the same rate, slow and stubborn as planets, as your funny sun dictates. And the redwoods grow to the lowest heaven of the galaxy, urging purity for our souls. And the scientists shout from the lowest heaven that the lowest heaven keeps expanding, urging Godspeed to our souls. The Quran says that stars are lamps and decorations and weapons to be thrown at devils. And the sun, infuriated, says, please ask for my opinion. Us deathless things eavesdrop and share our own tragic backstories and unremarkable futures. And sing the song of life we have yet to forget, the song of stomach acid and things that glint like glass to replenish. And know only of what the chambers of our hearts had learned of the world after completing their degrees in awe.
Okay, so I think Moja Kaf is going to go next. I saw a note from Moja and accidentally said her name instead of Shadab last time, but thank you so much for that beautiful reading. Felt so much listening to it. Moja, are you
I am so delighted to be here with all of you. I am here speaking from where I live and work on unceded lands of Indigenous people, including Osage, Caddo, and Quapaw nations. The Trail of Tears also runs through where I live and work, and over it, the Cherokee, Choctaw, Muskegee, Chickasaw, and Seminole nations were forcibly displaced. Without restoring the sovereignty of Indigenous peoples, including Palestinians, we cannot achieve collective liberation. And without reparations to Black people of the African diaspora whose forced labor enriched nations and permanent dismantling of anti-Black racism, we cannot achieve collective liberation. I also want to sort of shout out many African-American Muslim writers. So my first poem is called Daniyatun Qutufuha. One day we will break through to another structure, mitli, mitlak, mitlek, where green curly leaves touch every face divine. Qariban, you, my daughter's sons, son daughters, siblings, beloveds, oil lamps, frothing fountainheads of realness, of an evening, your Quranic aunties braid your hair, your fathers kiss your forehead, Tete's warming shawl around your shoulders, and you pull your cousins dancing into debke, jangling Khadija's bracelets on your wrists, black, brown, red, yellow. I can smell the sumac purpling the onions. Meantime, I am here. Sister, mother, ma'akunna, bringing to protect you turquoise amulets. It will be so simple one day, obvious like the sea, and all will say, why on earth did we not love like this before? In the old world, the hell? Could we not read the signs? Right here, the whole time, dangling bright, daniyatun qutufuha, and language will be different, accommodating all my loves, and we will queer those Arabic pronouns. How? لست أدري حبايب قلبي. لست أدري حبايب قلبي. You are showing me already أنها آتية. The poem is for Dar'a, for Idlib. And it's called, Have You Seen the One Who Blames the Hungry? Have you seen the one who blames the hungry for their hunger, mocks the refugee for their lack of home and land? It is they who spurn the ash-dusted orphan, task protesters for being tear gas, blame the Black civilian for the bullet in her body. Mark history, how many massacres they deny in finely furnished rooms. Fuck, then, those who triumph for a time, my vicious kin in their polished savagery. And I wanted to end with, I don't know, either a poem that was sort of picks up on a line from Tariq, eat. It's not there. Okay, I'm gonna go to my theory of wet chastity just for fun, because I feel like, you know, we want a little joy, right? As autumn approaches. And it's after Walada bint al-Mustakfi. So many men I'd love to have fucked if I wasn't so committed to monoamorousness. In the name of the compassionate, the merciful, if I make it to heaven off all this fucking chastity, I want those men there by the rivers of milk and honey. Remember, God, that brawny brown Egyptian standing with massive legs, pillars upholding the grand staircase of the Grand Mosque of my teen years? The sad-faced Sephardic guitarist in the Hell's Kitchen Cafe. Would that he'd played me with his nimble fingers. The Ghanaian golden prince in the suburbs, his arms full of groceries under whose feet rivers of orange juice flowed. Don't act like you don't know who I mean, God. Just because I cast my eyes away after my one freebie look, Allahumma, grant me that ice blonde repairman, my first married year, like a Viking in his great dirt-caked work boots, bestow upon me the Palestinian techie, his sexy dark eyes under one connected eyebrow, his geek sleeves rolled up over arms equally sexy and dark, plus the pale white professor with the epic lips who redlined my fresh college fantasies. I'd like to reserve a seminar table in heaven for him. And those three long-lashed Saudi men met in the Mecca Mall, so shallow, I wouldn't want to have two back-to-back conversations with them. I'd say, just shut up and roll around in the heavenly bed with me. You long-lashed Khaliji men whose lustrous black eyes shine juxtaposed to pristinely white headdresses. Oh, Lord of the Kaaba, who feedeth against hunger and preserveth my body against corruption. Please save a banquet of men for me, and tell whichever angels are in charge of the sex to be recording them all in your big black book in paradise. All the forbidden fruits of my earthly forbearance, forgetting none and multiplying my reward merrily, like row upon row of silky corn on the cob, verily, 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 verily. Thank you.
Thanks, Masha. I think the last author we're going to hear from is Taz Ahmed. I saw a lot of smiles while you were reading that poem across my screen. So pretty sure
Yeah.
the smiles are scattered all over.
I don't know how I'm gonna follow that, Moja. That was salams, everyone. My name is Taz. I am reading a piece which is not my usual style. Usually I either do poetry or nonfiction essays, but I've been spending a lot of time thinking about how, as an activist, we need to play with futurism so that we can imagine a better future for ourselves. So this is my attempt at doing that. So I'm just gonna jump right in. We would meet in dirt-filled backyards and empty warehouses. We'd meet weekly, a mishmash of Muslimas who all felt the need to prepare given the current regime change. In the group, I had secretly gathered the leader of a Desi rock band, an activist hijabi, an amateur fighter writer, and more, about 10 women in total. These were all people I adored. Most I'd met through organizing on community causes. Many I stood side by side with at protests. These were my ride or die in this fight. It was the first time, though, I was sure that B had been surrounded by so many Muslim women. He was unfamiliar with the customs and the culture, but he didn't care. He was here to provide a service. Here, take this, the instructor B said, handing me a rubber blade. My fingers tingled as I grasped the handle. It was black, about 4 inches long, with a blade that would bend. In my hand, it felt heavy, weighed. I glanced around. She was holding a flashlight, and she was holding a 2-foot-long wooden stick. We were all holding different types of weapons as we prepared to train. I pretended to stab myself with the rubber blade in my arm. It might not cut, but it would bruise. It felt real. It was real. We Muslimas stood in a line, breathed into the ground, and then breathed into the air, deep breaths, grounding our existence. Then we walked side by side, taking steps in a triangle as we found our center. And then we learned to fight. I had never felt so alive. The regime change meant people that looked like me were on the news a lot. The Nazis were emboldened by the anti-Muslim dog whistles of their leader. Through the encrypted text messaging app in secret groups, we'd share links to the stories of Muslimas getting attacked. There was a story of the young hijabi woman on the subway in Portland, where 2 men died from being stabbed, protecting her from an Islamophobe. There was the elderly Bangladeshi auntie that was walking on NYC streets who was stabbed as her husband walked behind her. A woman's hijab was pulled back before she was attacked with a knife. Each secret fight club session felt more urgent than the last as these incidences were fresh on our mind. Each class was adjusted based on the trauma of the news that week. After the hijab pull hate crime, we learned how to turn quickly so that we would use a scarf as a weapon. There were rumors that the Nazis were going to show up to protest protecting the rights of Muslims. The class after that, we learned how to wield the protest sign as a weapon. I didn't want fear to drive me, but I didn't know what being driven by love looked like. All I knew was that I was scared, and my friends were scared, and people that looked like us were scared. What I didn't expect was how full of love and adoration I felt for the Muslimas in Fight Club after each class. I loved them so much that I knew I'd wield a knife for them if they needed me to. It was Asata Shakur that said, "We must love each other and protect each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains." In this time of strife, though this started as a mission to combat fear, I found myself in the depths of a different kind of falling in love. It crept on slowly. This one morning, when we slashed at the sky, I noticed a thin strand of air glimmered behind it. I blinked, and just as quickly it faded away. I thought I had been dreaming. I practiced figure eights in my living room with the plastic blade I had bought online. The more my fist circled, the more it seemed the blade was slicing magic into the sky. With each whoosh, a glittering silver aura started growing around me. I stopped and blinked, and then it would be gone instantaneously. I thought for sure I was seeing things. The next Fight Club, as we Muslimas practiced stabbing blades through the sky, I saw a glitter spiral out of each blade, and a glimmering smoke encased us all. Each slice would mute the sound of the world, making it feel like no one else existed outside of us. We all saw the glittering silver aura around us, but none of us said anything about it, worried we'd break the spell. We had manifested something incredible. The swing of our blades crafted prisms and glitters. Maybe it was love, maybe it was Allah's protection, maybe it was a guardian angel, maybe this was what prayer looked like. Whatever it was, we had found within us the power to be invincible. We didn't speak of what we had seen that day. Who would have believed us anyways? We descended on the airport to disrupt travel and to protest against the vicious policy the regime had just enacted. A powerful executive order that stifled the civil rights of brown people, preventing the free travel of people at borders and airports. Across the nation, Airports were being shut down as the rebels mobbed the streets and prevented flights from going out. I showed up with a protest sign in my hand and a switchblade tucked in my boot. I walked up slowly and noted the counter-protest supremacists across the street, a mob of skinheads and white shirts and white men holding flags. No weapons were drawn, but I knew these men weren't there to play. I marched back and forth on the sidewalk with the other rebel protesters, screaming chants at the top of my lungs. Out of the side of my eyes, I spotted the rest of the Muslimas. We made eye contact with each other and gave each other a knowing nod. We positioned ourselves spaced out on the outskirts of the protest, creating a circle that could only be seen by our own. A knife flew through the sky. The blade came down, pointed at the rebels, and then another one and another one. It was raining blades. The rebel insurgents was under attack by the supremacists. I looked up to the sky and saw a hand reach up and grab a knife out of the sky and drop it on the ground. I saw Kay on the outskirts of the crowd giggling as she reached into the air, grabbing 2 knives at once. Hands kept grabbing the knives, one after another after another. The rebel chants became louder. The glimmering aura created a dome over the protest laughter, and laughter erupted in the crowd. The Muslimas made eye contact across the crowd. Our giggles could hardly be stifled. Love would protect us all. Those were just pieces of the longer piece, which you can find in the book. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for that, Taz. I think that was just such a beautiful piece to end our reading portion on. So we have as long as until 2:30, and I think you all can submit questions and we can have kind of a discussion, but we can also end earlier, basically, if there's not, if we run out. But I wanted to start with one question for everyone, which is that I think one of the most powerful things that kind of drives all of us as writers, is kind of a thread that I heard through what each person talked about, is that we write in order to connect with our own communities, to find new communities with other communities. And I'm wondering if anybody wants to talk about some of the favorite ways you've had that your writing has made you feel connected. So either like something that you've written that someone has commented to you about, or a place that you were able to read, or an impact that your writing had, whether it was small or big. Does anybody want to talk about that? You can just unmute yourselves and dive in.
It's more related to scholarship than creative work, I think, but I want to give a shout out to the Supelo site, Supelo Square, where a lot of Black Muslim work takes place. I put the website up in the chat, where scholars working on African American Muslim heritage, traces, evidence, put a lot of the work, a lot of it. Dr. Abdul Khabir, a Black woman, works on this site, directs this, and I think it's really important to continually be aware that, because African American Muslims get sidelined in like Arab and Desi and immigrant-centered Muslim American things, and I don't know, the white mainstream, when you say Muslim American, they seem to expect that, like us, right? And then they also get sidelined in Black art, and television shows and movies that center Black Christian life, because the church has also contributed hugely to African American culture. So there's this double sidelining that I just want to draw attention to, and that our histories also with there was the Atlantic slave trade, but there's also the Arabian Sea, Indian Ocean slave trade, and we also do have a history of systemic racism, and I'm teaching a course about Al-Andalus, and if we influenced Europe in many important scientific ways and philosophical ways and love poetry, and we also influenced Europe with like Muslim racism, Arab racism, specifically Arab, speaking as an Arab. So we got to take that too. We got to confront our own histories of anti-Black racism, and just confront it more and write about it more and deal with it more and be aware of it and be aware of when we're repeating it and unwittingly continuing that marginalization.
It's so well put. And I think I was really heartened this last summer to see events in Farsi and Arabic on anti-racism. It was like the first time I've sort of, and I think it's so necessary because a lot of us grew up with this in our communities, this idea that you try to lift yourself, and lifting yourself is kind of moving closer to a successful, aka white version of what people think of as success, and trying to distinguish yourself from Black or Hispanic communities. And I think there's some Black Muslims represented in this book, and also I don't think there's Hispanic Muslims represented in this book, although I do have a friend who's a Hispanic Muslim. We just had a book come out of poetry called Gentrification that I'll put a link of in the chat in a second. But it's so important, and I think that has to be part of our own conversations, is that if we're trying to move past or beyond or just exist or have a model of what an inclusive vision of American Muslim writing is, it needs to not just look a certain way or not just be based on people who are identified by someone else as looking a certain way, but really embrace the whole range of possibility. So thanks for speaking to that. Does anybody else have any other writers they want to mention while we're kind of talking about the diversity of Muslim American writing? Obviously, we're not able to capture all of it here, but maybe there's more links and things people want to share.
I'm glad you brought up Antonio's Lopez's book. I'm assuming he's the person you're talking about. I wish I'd known about his work when we were doing the anthology a couple of years ago. It certainly would have wanted to put him in there. But of course, there's a huge Muslim population, not only U.S. Latino Muslim population, but in Mexico and in South America as well.
Okay, I still want to hear about moments of connection that you all have felt when, and I'm glad to see that Duende District is featuring a conversation with Antonio. He is so awesome to listen to. Thank you for sharing that. I was at Bread Loaf with him, and we just had so much fun listening to him in our poetry slams. It just like brought the whole room to life. So if you have an opportunity to go listen to him, I would totally suggest that. But I do want to hear more about what motivates people in this room to write, and what moments of connection you felt that kind of stand out for you or keep you going when you're having a difficult day getting through your writing. I'll start. I'll go with mine. I think maybe because I've spent so much time living in DC and was, in the midst of kind of an environment where there's, I work 200 feet away from the Trump White House. So I just was bombarded with so much policy in my life. But I remember when a year and a half ago, when the US bombed the Iranian general. So my family is from Iran, Soleimani, in Iraq, and we were all just kind of scared that we were on the brink of war with Iran. And I was really touched to just have people I'd been in writing workshops with like years ago email me and just tell me they remembered this piece that I'd written about growing up in a family that had a picture of Khomeini on our wall. And tell me how much that had just kind of like turned the mirror for them on kind of how to look at that situation. Like it wasn't just about, well, these people all did something bad to us, we have to go after them and get them, but also reminded, it just, you know, like created this other sense of, well, there's also people in these countries who are human and who are children who are affected by these things. Even though I've never been to Iran, my family's from there. I grew up in California in the US. So that was something that was really touching for me. I wasn't expecting people from years ago in my past to reach out with that. And it's, you know, so it reminds me that it's just important to keep telling stories. And sometimes you don't know that someone will come back to you and 20 years later say, well, you're actually the person that helped me change my idea of like what it is to be a headscarf wearing woman or something like that. Anybody else want to go, or we can talk about something else.
I'll tell two quick stories that might be relevant. So I feel like when I first started writing and publishing, I didn't really have a context. So I felt a lot of pressure to explain a lot, and I don't think I mapped really well against what people's expectations were. I mean, I'm a practicing Muslim. I'm also gay, and people were like, "Is that an either or situation?" You know what I mean? And you know, I wrote this book about fasting, and I think that was when I first really started to connect with younger Muslim writers. And I had people writing to me saying like, oh, you did this. The book was a blog in the beginning. It was a daily blog back in the day when blogs were more a thing, I guess. And so a lot of people wrote to me and were like, oh yeah, I've always wanted to have like a daily Ramadan writing practice, or I have one, I do the same thing, I write every day. And Taz was involved actually, I think, in a group that was getting together and doing poetry, like poem a day, but like during Ramadan. And it was like really fantastic to hear about that, because I never had that sense of community. So in a way, it's like my writing helped me to find the community, actually. And the other story I'll tell is not a writing related story, but it was in the days soon after 9/11, and I was teaching at Oberlin College at the time. It was a couple of years after 9/11, but it was very much during the Iraq war stuff. And we had a visiting scholar from Indonesia, a young woman who just received her PhD and then was doing like postdoc or something like that. And it was really funny. She was this Indonesian scholar from Indonesia. She came to my house. She was wearing this baseball hat, very strange, like traditional clothes, and then this like Cleveland Indians at the time, it's not called that anymore, I don't think, baseball hat jammed on top of her head. And it was during Ramadan, and we were doing the iftars at my house. And I was doing iftars for the small Muslim community in Oberlin. It was like 5 or 6 kids, but then it started to grow because everybody wanted to like come for the dinners. So there were kids who were fasting so that they could come for iftar. Not only Muslim kids, there were like these non-Muslim kids too who were like, well, we want to come. And I was like, well, it's iftar, so you know, it's not, you know, you're welcome to fast. I mean, Islam is for everybody. And so these kids, these white Muslim kids, not white non-Muslim kids, I know there are white Muslims, but they would be fasting. And then they'd come for iftar at the end. And like the dean started to come, the president of the college came on. It turned into a thing. And so this woman came to the thing. She had this baseball hat jammed on her head. My partner would help me cook. And then he would come out, and he was like, you know, the spouse, and welcome everybody. And so mostly the kids didn't really say anything, but she was definitely, you know, even though they're Muslim or they're super religious, but they're still, you know, coming to Oberlin, so there's some sense of whatever, we're not fazed by that. But she was like looking at, you know, like she didn't really know how to react. The end of the night, she was a little weird, and I didn't know what happened. I thought like, did I alienate her? Is she not going to come back? And then I had to do all of this internal work in terms of like, was this you know, should I not present myself as like this? Did I drive her away? Is she not going to have anybody now? Because, you know, I had all those feelings. she comes the next week with her baseball hat is gone and she's wearing her full hijab, the whole thing. And she said, I came and I was really nervous about being in America, and like I didn't know how people were gonna act with me, and seeing you being Muslim as yourself gave me the courage that I could be as my kind of Muslim, that I could wear my scarf and just go and not worry about how people would be seen. And so, it was, I don't think we know what we put into the world. And, as messy as we think we are in like our own lives, we feel like I don't understand anything about being human, about being Muslim, about like, I'm, the completely messy. And then someone else looks at us and gains something strong. So I think the lesson, if there is a lesson, is that, our fear to manifest is like a form of self-protection that we can't afford. So shine.
So wise. You talked, Kazim, about how you sort of wrote your way into finding that community, and I think I find that so much to be true. And like the more you just kind of put yourself out there, the more you're going to attract to yourselves the community that you want to see and provide that bravery to other people. Or I don't actually like to call it bravery, just like model. But I also want to make a shout out kind of on a related note that I think for me, one of the things that most provided that iftar moment that you described, but in written form of a book, is the anthology that Taz was involved in, Love Inshallah, which is a smaller anthology of just like love stories by Muslims, I think mostly in the West. And it was just so beautiful, like this anthology, to be able to see such a broad range of what our experiences are, to be able to kind of find a home in those. So I want to hear if others kind of have specific writers or books or other things that inspired them to kind of have their own moment to shine that we can share with each other and with our audience members. And then we can get to some audience questions.
I wanted to mention both things that you mentioned that I'm involved with. The Poetry a Day for Ramadan group, Kazim's book has been a guide to so many of the writers in there. We have like, the group grew into like 70 people. And then I was like, I can't add more, it's unmanageable, but both professional writers and unprofessional writers that became writers over the years. And then Love Inshallah was also a bunch of like, I don't want to say amateur, but like, new writers. And then like over the years, I've been thinking a lot about the Love Inshallah book actually, because it's been 10 years since the book came out. And I keep thinking about how culture, because it's 9/11, I keep thinking about how much culture has shifted in the past 20 years. And when that book came out, we got so much hate for it. We got so criticized for the content in it. And now I feel like Muslim women are writing about sex here and there and everywhere, and no one's critiquing it. And I just keep thinking about like how that really like kind of broke the ceiling. I wanted to add one more thing before going to your new question. I wanted to say like the project that I'm such an activist, I'm such a community-driven person. When the man got kicked off the airplane in 2016 for saying the word inshallah, we wrote a collective poem. And I started it on Facebook. I asked everyone to write a verse, 4 lines with the word inshallah in it. And then that turned into a 17-verse poem. And that 17-verse poem we in LA would read at vigils and protests. And then we printed it up on Risiograph and we handed it out to people. And then the action for that was we wanted people to get on airplanes and stick it inside the Southwest magazine. So that was going to be our act of rebellion or act of activism, depending on how you looked at it. So I think for me, to your initial question, like for me, writing is, I think poetry is a form of I think poetry is both a form of spirituality, which is what it is for me during the month of Ramadan. It's like that connection, but I also think it's a form of activism and collective action where you can write poems together, you can create movement together, you can create community together. And I think that's been what's so powerful for me. I think I'm one of those people that loves being in anthologies. I loved being in the Love and Shola book. I loved being in Good Girls Marry Doctors. I think like the community that's created around a really good anthology, when the book readings and just going out and meeting new people, there's something so magical about that. And I'm really looking forward to seeing who shows up for New Moon and just being a part of this 65. I mean, like, oh my gosh, that's so much. Like, I think Love and Shola was 26 writers. Good Girls Marry Doctors was also in the 20s. 65 is just incredible that we have so many people to be in community with. I totally didn't answer your question, but I wanted to speak to all the previous things.
That's a great answer. And we have the link for Love and Shola, but I realized recently that the book is on back order, and I think that it needs to, I think we need to bring it back. So if anybody is interested in that book, it looks like there's a link there, and maybe that will happen. But yeah, so the question was really what writers or kinds of written word have helped inspire you. Does anyone else want to go before we, I think we have a few more minutes to get to some audience members.
Yeah, so I'm sort of a newish writer. I've only been writing seriously for like since high school, which is like 5 years ago. And I've always sort of struggled with finding community through my work. But one like big instance that I found that I connected to others like through the written word is through the Halal If You Hear Me anthology, which I have work in that, and it was just so exciting to see that, to see so many different kinds of Muslims together in one book. And I reached out to so many people that way, and so that was a great moment for me. And I also wrote a poem and published it in Hobart. It's called How to Butcher This. Wow, I don't forget the name now. It's I'm Going to Butcher This, the poem. And so I received a lot of comments and just notes about that. It's about people mispronouncing your name because due to lack of care. And those kind words and how people also related to that really warmed my heart. So yeah, those were two of my moments.
Thanks for sharing that. I think we had one audience member from Abiquiu, New Mexico, who published a memoir in a Sufi journal about visiting the shrine of a Muslim sect. And the story is called In the Realm of Mercy. This might sound weird, but the responses I loved the most were from two non-Muslims who said they cried while reading my memoir. I loved their responses. So if you want to put a link to that in the chat, Karima, please do. And I think we have I need to make a shout out to some of our authors who are here today and didn't get a chance to read. We have Yahya Fredrickson and looking through our list, Sile Karzai, I don't remember all 65. So I think, and we have Mandy Brower here. I might be missing some others. But Yahya, did you want to say something? I think you can unmute yourself if you like. In the meantime, thanks for sharing that link in the chat, Karima. I think while we wait to see if Yahya can come on, I think similar to what Karima said, I've had a lot of individuals from like conservative Southern backgrounds in the US come to me and tell me how much they related and saw themselves in my writing. I think that's this connection that's just kind of an undertold story between growing up, and I think someone's kind of talked about it as fundamentalist girlhood. Okay, so maybe maybe we don't have a question for Yahya. Oh, wait, technical difficulties. Okay, all right. Well, I think we have shared, I think Duende District can share the link again to order the New Moons anthology. The Red Hen website is going to have a list of coming events, I think, coming in the coming weeks. We do have an event that's in the works that's scheduled for November 18th with Mount Tam College at San Quentin Prison, where there are a lot of Black Muslims, because, you know, I think there's often, to Moja's point, there's kind of a separation between our communities. And it's important for us to have dialogue and discussion across that. So I just want to mention those things again, and then just see if anybody else has any final words while I share the Red Hen link.
I wanted to respond to your earlier question about what connects us and, you know, how we felt motivated to write. I started writing obviously years ago when I was in Pakistan and before I came here as a foreign student. My connection to writing after 9/11 was what has a lot to do with being a young mother. And to all the writers who are parents who were raising children, some of us I had babies. I had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. And I was super vulnerable as a writer and a parent. I was raising boys in this world where we felt isolated, threatened, and in all kinds of ways. And my motivation to research and read and do all of this stuff that I did between college and grad school, years and years of just, you know, trying to negotiate the multiple cultures and, you know, values and all of that. It just made me, for one thing, it made my job more difficult as a parent, and made my job more difficult as a writer as well. I spent far less time on my writing and my reading and my connecting with other writers than I would have liked to, because I had to be very careful with how I was raising my kids. And the motivation was there. I think the motivation became even, you know, stronger, because I felt like, you know, writing was I needed to rescue myself through writing. And I also needed to strengthen my connection with my Muslim heritage. And there wasn't any easy way of doing that in that. I mean, in the early 2000s, we didn't have active social media. You know, we didn't have those connections that we take for granted now. So I think we were all more isolated than we are today. So that connection, I think, I'm really grateful for in the past, you know, decade or more. Maybe, you know, 2007, 2008 is when we all sort of joined Facebook and Twitter and all that. But yeah, I mean, I think that's something that I haven't really tackled in my writing yet. But just having a generation now, you know, we now have my kids are in college now. So 20 years ago, they were babies, and I really had to be all the things that I couldn't, you know, that I couldn't muster. Just being a strong person, being a knowledgeable person, being able to answer questions, and being genuinely. I think the one thing that became very important to me was to try to be genuinely informed and genuinely knowledgeable. I hadn't, when I was growing up in Pakistan, we were not taught Islamic history. We were taught the history of the Raj, and we were taught the history of how Pakistan came into being, and some contemporary current stuff. But we were not taught the history that I had to teach myself in order to pass it on to my children. So, and the resources weren't there. So anyway, so that I just wanted to say that I think from the challenge of being a parent and a writer at that time, yeah, I just learned to, just get deeper into my own heritage, get deeper into my own, all the things that we were expected to know. We were expected to be walking encyclopedias after, all of it. We were asked questions that we didn't know how to answer about who we were. And it was important to have the language for that, to have that. And it's unfair. It's unfair. We're put in a very unfair position. Not everybody in the world will, you can't expect every Hindu and Buddhist to have, tons of information about their heritage. But it was necessary, at least for me as a parent, it was necessary to be able to have a deep and comprehensive engagement, if not knowledge, at least, sort of reaching out and looking for, that heritage. Anyways, that's a long answer. But I think that oftentimes parent writers are not, we don't speak of, I never speak of myself as a vulnerable parent and a vulnerable writer, as a Muslim American. And that discussion is sort of absent. But I think it's an important, now that we have a new generation of Muslims who've grown up in that time and who have their own voices. And that's one thing that I think the only thing that is uplifting now is that the young Muslims today are very articulate and very clear about who they are. And they're, so I feel like we have hope, despite all the brokenness and the feeling overwhelmed and things getting messier, we do have hope for the future.
You answered one of my other questions, which is about what you're hoping to see in American Muslim writing in the next 20 years. I think you also just really made such a good point that all of us, whether we identify with the Muslim community, adjacent to it, or outside of it, really there's so much we have to teach ourselves. And that's why we gather, that's why we read, that's why we do this. So I just really want to say how much I'm really excited to see what each of you write over the next 20 years, and also the new writers that emerge, and how grateful I am for everyone who's been with us and taken time in the middle of a Saturday to come and listen. And hopefully you're inspired to go and read this book and support Duende and read some of the other books that we've mentioned. And I'm looking forward to seeing more of you in the events that kind of come over the next several months. And I think that's going to be it for us. Thank you.